launch with this database server. So we're just going to create a database called test. If we leave it blank, then there will be no databases on this database server, and we can create those later on. But we'll just have one ready to go, and we'll call it test. Now, we don't need to worry about backups because this is just a lab. We're going to be doing it on the free tier. We just don't want to have any hassle with that. So I'm just going to change the backup retention period to 0, and that will mean that it will disable automated backups for the instance. We don't need to worry about monitoring or maintenance. We just leave that as it is. Again, this is just a hands-on introduction to RDS. And then we can launch that DB instance. After a certain amount of time, that will be acknowledged and we can view our DB instances. And we can see there that it has a status of creating, and after a while it will go to being available for use. Okay, so after a few minutes, or quite a few minutes, we've got our MySQL database server on RDS up and running, and its status is available. So the thing that we need to understand here is that we can now connect through to this RDS instance through an endpoint, and that endpoint is here. So we need to take note of that, and the part that we're interested in is the endpoint domain. So everything there finishing with amazonaws.com, and we don't do the :3306. We just select that. So I'm just going to select that now because we're going to be using that later on. Now, before we do that, we need some software to connect into our MySQL instance. So we need to go to the MySQL homepage, and there is a link in the lab notes to this to download the MySQL Workbench and install it to our system. Okay, so here I am in the MySQL Workbench, and down the bottom there we can see that we have the MySQL connections, and we don't have any as yet, so we just click on the plus sign next to it and we'll add our connection to our RDS instance. So we just give that a name. So I'm just going to call it backspace, that will be fine. Now a host name is going to be that connection string that we got, or that domain that we got from our RDS console, and it's not going to have the :3306 on the end of it. It's just going to have the domain details, the host name details, and the 3306 is our port number, which is already detailed there on the screen. Now our username is going to be that master user that we set up when we created our RDS instance, and I used admin. And that is all we need. We just need a user, we need a host name, and we need the port that we're connecting on. So if we just test that connection now, it will ask for a password. And we've successfully made that MySQL connection. So we just click on OK, and we can add that to there. So once we've created that connection, we can obviously connect into our database. So all we need to do is double click on that. And there we've connected into our RDS database, and we've got our MySQL, or our SQL dashboard there set up. Now, if you look down here under schemas, we can see that we have that test database that we created, or that we requested to be created in our launch configure, or when we're doing our configuration for our launch details of this RDS instance. So if we click on that information icon next to test, that will give us some information on that. Okay, and there we can see we've got our backspace database with a test schema in there. So our server backspace and our test database inside there. So there we have it. We've successfully created an RDS instance, and we've connected into it using MySQL Workbench, which was pretty great. Now that you've successfully connected in using the MySQL Workbench, I'm going to show you how to connect in with the MySQL shell software, and that will allow you to do command line work, such as issuing SQL commands to your RDS instance. So the first thing we need to do is to install or download the MySQL shell, and there is a link in the lab notes to that URL to do that. Now when you get there, just scroll down, select your operating system. If you're on Windows, don't do this installer for Windows. It will install MySQL and all this stuff you don't really need. All we need is this 16.5 meg file down the bottom here. So just download that. If you're on a Mac, it will look something like this. So you will have a DMG archive that you can download and extract after you've downloaded. Okay, so now that we're in the MySQL shell, we can connect into our RDS instance. So the way that we do that is we do backslash, not forward slash, backslash, connect, and then we do our username, which was admin, and then we do @ and then we do that endpoint, our RDS endpoint. So we just jump back into the RDS console, we'll select that endpoint and copy it and bring it over. Now we don't have to worry about removing the :3306, we can leave it there, or we can take it off and it will default to 3306 anyway. We enter our password that we created and that should connect us in a short amount of time. And there we go. Now what I'd like to do is just issue some SQL commands to the database. So I need to change to SQL mode. So again, we do \SQL. And I can issue a command now. So show databases. Now make sure that you put a semicolon on the end of your SQL commands, otherwise they're just going to hang there. And then we can see we've got our standard MySQL databases there, and down the bottom we've got our test database that was created for us by the RDS service. Now the test database will be empty, so I'm just going to select one of the system databases there, so the MySQL one will be fine. So I just do use, and then that schema or that database that I'm going to use, so MySQL will be the one that I use. And there we go, schema is set to MySQL. Now, when you do that command, make sure that you don't put the semicolon on the end of it, otherwise it'll hang again. Now, I just want to issue another SQL command again, so we can show schemas this time. Well, actually, no, we'll show tables, actually. And that will list the tables for the MySQL database. And there you go. So there's all those standard tables that you would have in there. So we've managed to connect in using the command line interface or the shell, MySQL shell, and we've switched over to the SQL mode and we've run SQL commands. So what we're going to do now is we're going to jump back into the AWS RDS console and we're going to delete all this to make sure that we don't get a bill at the end of the month. And back in the RDS console, we go to, or we first of all, we select our MySQL instance. We go to Instance Actions, and then we go to Delete. We don't want to create a final snapshot, and then we click the acknowledgement that we won't be able to get this back after we've deleted, and we click on Delete. And that will be deleting, and eventually it will disappear from the screen if we keep refreshing the screen here. So there we have it. We've created that instance and we've connected in, and now we're cleaning it all up afterwards. So I look forward to seeing you in the next lab.